So today I'm joined by the Non-Alchemist, host of a YouTube channel of the same name. And before we get into your biography, I just wanted to mention that I appreciate your channel because you're incorporating more and more philosophy of religion into your videos, but it's distilled and communicated in such a way that you don't need an extensive background in philosophy to understand what you're saying. So it's way more rigorous and philosophically literate than many atheist channels, but it's not out of touch with how religion is actually practiced and with how many of us have experienced it. So I think you're striking a nice balance there.
Well, thank you for that. I just want to say first, thanks again for having me on. And before I toot my own horn, and get too, excited about your comments there, I just want to say I really do enjoy your content, and it's exciting that you're starting to break into YouTube as well. Just so we can further lead more people to hell. With with our YouTube ministries. But yes, yes, I do. I go by the Non-Alchemist. I started originally with like a blog, kind of screaming into the void, into a blog after my deconversion, and kind of moved to Twitter, and eventually it was a YouTube channel. And the name, I don't know if you're gonna ask about the name, but the Non-Alchemist does come from the infamous Sam Harris passage in the Letter to a Christian Nation. Though I was an agnostic when I picked that name, it's not like I agree with completely with the sentiment, that he was. It just made me laugh. Like I read the paragraph and I just saw Non-Alchemist and I was like, that'd be a funny name. And it's sort of a hat tip too to like the non-stamp collector. Like he has those funny videos about the Bible and Bible contradictions and stuff like that. So
yeah,
some of that was sort of a hat tip there as well. So yeah,
cool. Well, why don't you tell us about yourself and your religious background and how you came to make a YouTube channel about religion?
Sure. I guess let's start with the channel. I've said this elsewhere. Anyone that knows my content, my main goal is to undermine what I take to be religious fundamentalism, and I see that in different ways. Like in one way, I see it as sort of an attitude, and there's also specific beliefs that sometimes go along with it. So, like a certain kind of dogmatism towards beliefs is usually like a feature of fundamentalism. But also there's specific beefs, goodness gracious, specific beliefs. And so for example, certain versions of conservative inerrancy that I like to take jabs at, stuff like that. And so I see fundamentalists generally as like they have a literalistic disposition towards their holy text, whatever it is. And that's, again, normally in conjunction with this attitude of dogmatism or, some combination of beliefs that would be laughable to most scholars. So, for example, maybe they think that the Exodus or the conquest narratives happened as depicted in the Bible, just for example. But YouTube specifically, so that's just my content in general, but YouTube specifically, why I got on YouTube, and you kind of hinted at this at the beginning, it was kind of born out of my own frustration with the state of atheist or skeptical YouTube. So I would be watching, on the one hand, there's these kind of highbrow, like Majesty of Reason, which is a great channel, check it out. But a normal person's not going to like click on Majesty of Reason. They'd be like, what the fuck is he talking about? You know what I mean? And so, but that's great. It's still
You're
great
like,
content.
who is this energetic guy? Why is he so happy about philosophy?
Yes. What do these terms mean? Anyway, so yeah, like that is a niche that needs to be filled. But at the same time, there's this kind of really highbrow content. And on the other hand, there just seems to be like a lot of slapstick sort of atheist content where I'm not trying to, say that they don't make any good points, but the problem is they make so many mistakes in how they present stuff that it's just easy to pick apart. So a theist could just watch a video and just be like, well, they made this mistake, this mistake in theology, this mistake in biblical studies, this mistake in philosophy. And it's like whatever they were trying to say just gets completely overlooked because they just gets nitpicked to death. I'm not saying I nitpick stuff too, so I'm not saying you can't nitpick, but I'm just saying in general, I started thinking, why don't I try this? Like why don't I try to do some popular level stuff, but be more careful. And so that's how I became a new atheist.
New atheist. Okay. Yeah. So you were like a Calvinist, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So like when I was going through my like religious deconversion process, there was like these like few years of like real instability, and it went from like, just kind of I don't know what you'd call it, just kind of like conservative, like non-denominational Christianity that I was like, raised with. And then I kind of like went to this like Pentecostal church and like youth groups for like, I don't know, a couple of years. And then like things started getting destabilized like in that period, and I wasn't like a Calvinist, but I adopted it was like a grab bag. Like I just adopted a couple Calvinist beliefs because I thought they kind of made more sense, like with predestination and the skepticism towards libertarian free will. Is that like a mischaracterization? Calvinists in general they don't believe in libertarian free will, right?
Correct. Yeah. No, they don't.
Okay.
It's all compatibilists. I mean, I think there might be a weird person, like a weird scholar out there who might think that, I mean, it's not within, most people would argue that like within the confessionally reformed tradition, and generally speaking, historic Calvinism is not compatible with libertarian free will. But I think I forget the guy's name, but there are some scholars that kind of are within a broadly reformed tradition that do try to kind of push the envelope. And because Calvinism and the reformed tradition are like, Calvinism usually means something very specific about like the 5 points of Calvinism.
Yeah.
Reformed tradition is so much more broad, where it's like has to do with like covenant theology, like infant baptism, like how do you view the church? Like there's so many factors. And so there's some people within that tradition that the Reformed tradition, push certain boundaries. So I'm not going to say completely, but yes, Calvinism, generally speaking, not compatible with libertarian free will.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, were you a Calvinist like your whole Christian life?
No, not at all. I actually hated it at the beginning. So I guess we can, I'll just kind of give a sketch of my background and upbringing. I'll kind of move to that point and get there. So I was raised as like an evangelical as a kid, sort of jumped around. Like I've been to like blah, blah, blah Bible church, the Vineyard, which is the more charismatic Baptist churches, non-denominational. I kind of went all over the place. And so being within kind of an evangelical context, I guess when I got saved or something, when I considered my conversion was probably around 6 or 7. I remember being on the top bunk, starting to cry because I thought I was a sinner and asking Jesus to forgive me. I guess it didn't take, but so, yeah, I mean, that was kind of a standard evangelical upbringing. My parents, my home life, my parents were great parents. So there was not a ton of silliness. I mean, obviously like some people's experience within evangelicalism is awful. Mine wasn't. I think that might have had something to do with the fact that, I guess we were sort of a stereotypical evangelical. Sorry about my dogs. Sort of a stereotypical evangelical family.
Can you euthanize them? Can you put them down, please?
I don't know. I mean, I guess there'd be like a greater good if I did that or something. The free will for me, euthanizing my dogs, there's some greater good, ultimately. But so.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted.
No, you're good.
You were like, so evangelical family.
Yeah, so sort of stereotypical evangelical, where like we went to church, but it wasn't. We prayed before dinner and stuff like that, but it wasn't like a huge part of our everyday life. Mm-hmm. So we would go to church, and none of us really were avid Bible readers or anything. So it was kind of just a thing, kind of a folksy kind of belief. You know how like evangelicalism, a lot of the day-to-day people is kind of like this folk belief. Like, you got to get saved and you go to church week to week or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it was never like a huge part of our lives. Anyway, but so not to say that there wasn't any toxic elements or anything like that though, because I do remember my brother is an atheist now, but he became an atheist when he was in high school. But I do remember he had some doubts very early on, and he was expressing those, like he's worried that God doesn't exist. And my mom and I sort of swarmed him. We're trying to get him to say the sinner's prayer again, like say the magic words. So
say the not hell words.
Yes, say the not hell words. Yes, we were trying to get him to say the not hell words. But so I'm looking back on that. That's pretty toxic. Because I mean, he's just expressing his doubts, and like within us, it's creating fear. Like, oh no, like he was pretty young. I mean, he was skeptical from an early age. So I think that was a lot of kids are kind of just take on certain beliefs for a long time, and then they become skeptical. He was skeptical probably since he was like maybe like 12. I mean, like I don't know, my volume just went up, but he was always had that kind of disposition to be skeptical. But
yeah, no, there's like evidence, not to interrupt your story, but there is like genetic evidence that there's like there are like these underlying genetic factors that could direct your religious proclivities and dispositions. Like in the Minnesota study of twins reared apart, they found like many sets of identical twins, and there was like a huge correlation between their religious beliefs, such that their religiosity was usually basically equal, but their religion kind of conformed to whatever area they were like adopted in. So there would be like a guy in Poland who was like a very religious Catholic, and then there would be his unknown twin brother who was like a very devout Jew in Trinidad. So it's like the religiosity matched the others, but they just kind of adopted whatever religion was in their local environment. But yeah, there is some evidence to suggest that our like religious disposition is like, strongly genetically influenced.
Yeah. It's all part of God's plan. There's no natural explanation,
Yeah. I mean, that's part of why I've started to question free will, because I was just, I started thinking about like how you're to some, it's very elementary point that you're a product of your genes and environment to a large extent. And if you change some of those variables,
right,
then you change the eternal consequences that someone is going to be facing, whether they're tortured for an eternity or not.
Yeah.
And like, it depends on things that are outside their control ultimately. Like when they were born or where they were born, just certain like peer groups and familial groups and your genetic makeup, and all these things go into your eternal fate. And it seemed like predestination was just kind of unavoidable, and like Calvinists were the only ones who could actually look it straight in the face and not be in denial.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely one of my other friends that I've talked to, the apostate. I mean, he came from a reform. There's a lot of us that I kind of found on Twitter that came from a reform background, and it is, in a certain way, it is kind of not satisfying in an emotional sense, but like logically, it's like, why is the world the way it is? Well, I mean, God's a dick. I mean, he got to do this for his glory, like the suffering is for his glory. I mean, I'm being facetious here, but like, ultimately just things are kind of this, like, not completely, it's not fatalistic, it's not mechanistic. There's lots of Calvinists that would want to say things like God uses means to accomplish his ends. And so your means of, willing certain things is the way is used, like as a secondary way for God to accomplish primary. There's all kinds of ways of rationalizing how, this isn't totally determinist. I mean, it is a version of determinism, but anyway, I'm just going on a rant now, but yeah. So, but I do want to say this is interesting. I'll go back to Calvinism in a minute, but just going back to my brother, it's interesting to me from this perspective, thinking about, like, I just want to make a brief comment about apologetics. So we were both exposed to like a lot of the popular level apologetics growing up. I mean, I'd read Craig. I mean, I'd listened to Craig. I read Craig a little bit later, but I'd listened to a lot of debates from Craig. I'd read like Frank Turek, Lee Strobel. I'd read all these books. My brother, he didn't read as much as I did, but he read like On Guard by Craig, which is basically the distillation of reasonable faith for like a popular audience, which is, I mean, it's got a lot of interesting stuff in there. But so we cut our teeth on this popular apologetic stuff. And here we are, both atheists now. And so I think that there's this naive view among some Christians that if we can just get more of this apologetics into people's hands earlier, like this popular level apologetics, it's going to like somehow stem the tide of apostasy or something, at least be a contributing factor. But, to be frank, like if the apologetics just suck and can be easily dismantled, then it just ultimately it's going to backfire.
Yeah.
And it's fine. I mean, ultimately you're helping the atheists out. If when you give a bunch of every Frank Turek book that gets given to someone, an angel loses their wings. I know. But
yeah. No, I was oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just thinking about that because not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I'm about to go back to Manitou Springs this fall, where I met my wife 7 years ago. We just got married last year, and it's going to be like our 1 year anniversary this fall. So we were just going to go, thank you. And we were just going to go back to the place where we first crossed paths, which was at this like apologetics camp that I was kind of sent to because I was expressing doubts. I went like willingly, but it was like strongly suggested that I go there by my mom. And she went there on her own. But anyway, we met there. And it was a lot like what you're saying, where it's like I had not been as involved in apologetics. Like it wasn't really a part of like my religious community. Like my dad actually says that like apologetics books are like the one genre of Christian books that he's like can't stand reading. But like so I was not as like familiar with it. And then I went to this like 2-week long camp that had like something like 70 or 80 hours of lectures. Like, Frank Turek was a speaker there. He gave like probably 4 hours of lectures. I have irreparable brain damage from those 4 hours, but like, it was just like,
makes sense, man.
I was just like, this is it. I was like, this is the defense of the, like, it really like was the final tipping point where, because I really was going there expecting that this would be a part of my testimony, and I would be like, yeah, I was an atheist. And then, you know, a couple of like wise Christians just answered all my objections. And that did not happen. You know, instead, like I saw the, you know, defenses that were offered, and I was just like, maybe God isn't real.
Yeah.
Like really like, you know, pushed me, it had, you know, that backfiring effect that you were talking about. And you know, I eventually, like, you know, got into the better defenses, you know, like into the like Josh Rasmussen's and you know, Randall Rousers and people like that. And but the thing is, like, as that was happening, I was also getting into the more rigorous defenses of atheism, like Graham Oppy and Schellenberg and stuff. So it was like just kind of this arms race where at first it was just like, oh, this is just like a slam dunk for atheists, you know. And then once you move past that pop level into the more like philosophically rigorous material, then it like, you know, I kind of lost some of that like absolute conviction that I had. I'm still like, I still lean very, very like heavily on the atheist side, you know.
Right.
But yeah, when I was first exposed to pop apologetics, I was not impressed.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you though about your transition, because when your transition, I wanted to ask you about your transition from agnostic to atheist. So because when I first met you, you were an agnostic.
Right.
But then in a stunning move of arrogance, you freely chose to believe with absolute certainty that God doesn't exist.
Right.
So my first question is, are you omniscient? And as a follow-up, why do you hate God?
I mean, I don't know. The devil has cookies, you know, over on his side. So, but yeah, that's true. I didn't identify as an atheist till years after my initial deconversion from Christianity. It didn't really have. I mean, that's something I can get into, I guess, a little bit, maybe at a different time. My actual deconversion from Christianity, but specifically agnostic to atheist. I read, like I said, yeah, it didn't like. So, for example, some of the cognitive dissonance for some of the theodicies of like dealing with suffering, like some of that would weigh on me. So you would have like these kind of ivory tower speculations about how to explain evil, and then when life beats you up enough, or you see life beat other people up enough, you start to kind of be like, are these armchair speculations really holding up? Like my experience started to kind of poke, but that didn't, you know, that was a very small part of the actual deconversion from Christianity specifically. But so for agnostic to atheist, I had read Oppy's Best Argument Against God and Rasmussen and Leon's Is God the Best Explanation of Things, sort of back to back. And like pretty soon after that, I don't know if it was like a week, or I don't know the exact time frame, but shortly after that, I'd had a conversation with my brother, my atheist brother, and he was kind of grilling me on my agnosticism a little bit, you know, like kind of like poking at it, like, well, you know, just trying to, and I was kind of defensive, you know, in the moment. But then I don't know if it was right after, but at some point after that phone call, I was kind of like, I think I am an atheist. You know, it's almost something that I think I'd internalized, but didn't quite realize until I talked it through with someone. Like it took him kind of prodding, like, so what do you mean by agnostic? Like, and again, if he'd asked us, if it had been like 6 months before that, I would have still been like, yeah, I'm agnostic. But I'd read those books, and some of that stuff had kind of, you know, struck me, and then had that conversation. I was like, wow, I think I don't believe in God. Like maybe I should just. It's kind of I realized something that I'd already kind of internalized that maybe was there before, but I was just like, yeah. And ever since that moment, I grew horns and started killing people.
Yeah, and started eating babies. But it's interesting because, like, I think you and I both had that kind of moment that a lot of atheists say they don't have. Like, they describe it as this gradual thing. But for me, it really was this moment where I was like, oh, I don't believe in God. Like, it was this kind of, like, moment. And it had been something that was, like, bubbling under the surface, obvious, like, from, you know, my behavior, that it had been, like a long time coming. But there was this moment where I like suddenly became aware of the fact that I like didn't believe in God. And like when I introspected on it, I was like, I haven't believed in God for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
it's like aware of it. Yeah,
it's not like a light bulb moment where like people converge. It's like they went from, you know, a position to another position. It's more like you realize that you have already moved from this position and just didn't quite, you know, kind of like that's perfect. I think that's a perfect way of putting it.
Well, okay. So why did you read those books? You read The Best Argument Against God by Oppy and the Leon Rasmussen book. Were those recommended by someone?
I mean, I had been so after I had deconverted from Christianity, agnostic for me was in some part a placeholder, just because I was kind of like, my whole world was kind of turned upside down. I left Christianity. And so I was like, I didn't even know if I believed it. It wasn't like I definitely don't know. It was kind of just like, I don't even know what I believe. So I think probably agnostic is the best designator for me at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so that started a journey to kind of figure out, do I believe in God? What do I believe about like theism? And so I think one of the earlier books I read was The Wisdom to Doubt by Schellenberg. It was probably, I think that might've been, I mean, other than Craig, and I read like Reasonable Faith, but I think like when I really started digging into philosophy of religion, that might've been the first like technical philosophy of religion book I've ever read. And then I read like The Hidden Argument, and I started working my way in. Like, I think I'd said this in another place too, like Jeff Lauder helped kind of, as I was thinking about whether I believed in God or not, he kind of helped point me to he was kind of a intermediary to me starting to kind of plunge into the deeper philosophy of religion stuff. Because obviously he's popularizing a lot of Draper. I haven't read a ton of Draper yet, but I realized that's what he's doing with his a lot of his presentations. So anyway, yeah. So I just gradually started going down that path and following people on Twitter and just wanting to know what I believed about that. Because I mean, I've said this before too, where even if I had become a theist, like let's say I left Christianity and then thought, oh, theism's true, it would raise my credence for Christianity a little bit, but I wouldn't just go back to Christianity. If someone convinced me God exists right now, I'd still not be a Christian. I know some atheists will disagree with that and think that we should raise it more. But for me, based on what I think, like approaches to miracle claims and all that kind of stuff, I would still be very skeptical. But yeah. Anyway, not going on a tangent about that yet. So, but yeah, so I had basically it was an outcome of just going deeper and deeper into philosophy of religion. And again, compared to some of the people I interact with, I'm still a newbie to some of this, but I don't remember specifically if they were recommend. I mean, I've been following like ex-apologist, Felipe Leon, and I saw that, that he had co-authored that book, and that was kind of like, well, I need to read that sometime. And of course, I'd follow Relay Theology, and like every tweet they're like, Oppie, like, and I was like, okay, I got to read Oppie then, just Oppie, Sobel, Mackey. Like I just see these names over and over. And I mean, I was aware of Mackey and stuff like that, but that's sort of it was very gradual. This was gradual, just my interest in more and more philosophical topics was gradual. So yeah, so I don't remember specifically if they were recommended to me or if it was just I just discovered them, or maybe I was like, hey, Oppie wrote this short book instead of. I think I read, I read The Best Argument Against God before I read Arguing About Gods. So I think I was like, yeah, let me start with the short one, because that other one was like
same.
Yeah,
I didn't even start with the book. He wrote a paper that summarized the book, and I read that first, and then I read the book. And then, so has your methodology for approaching this question changed? I assume it has, like as a result of reading those books. But like, what is your methodology for approaching the question of God's existence? Like, how do you go about weighing like a big metaphysical question like that?
So I don't know that when I actually transitioned from agnostic to atheist, I don't know that there were like the methods at the time. Like I wasn't thinking about any method. It was more just, I think I've heard it. I didn't actually read where he said this, but I think Van Inwagen has said before where he compared his conversion to theism, like the duck rabbit picture, where you just sort of looks like a duck and then you start looking at it differently and you're like, maybe it looks like a rabbit more, where you can look at the same picture and see two different things. I guess I would say, as I had been reading and just my journey, I just started, I'd seen it as a duck and then started looking more and more like a rabbit, like, maybe this data makes more sense if I just look at it this way. So at the time of doing that, there was no methodology on my mind. It was just kind of like a gradual, again, the actual moment I realized it was very sudden that I was an atheist, but in the time it was kind of, I think, gradual to whenever the point was that I internally became an atheist. It was kind of a gradual shift of looking at the picture differently. But yeah, so now I really like that thing that you did, why you said,
see, you're a man of good taste as well.
Yes. So I really liked it because I identified with almost everything. I think pretty much everything. I was like, yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. So one of the things you said was, it's kind of, you can see value in both approaches to like comparing the virtues of a theory versus saying like, here are these lines of evidence that make something more probable than not. And so, yeah, I definitely, after I read The Best Argument Against God, I could clearly see the value of, it was really driven home to me that like, do I need God to explain anything? And if you just compare these theories and use these certain criteria, it does seem like now, and this is another thing. I think, and I DM'd you about this maybe a couple weeks ago. I think I'm getting close to just saying, yes, I'm a naturalist. So I might already be one and just realize it later. Yeah, so after reading that, I really came to appreciate that approach. And then I think like Leon, in a lot of his chapters with Rasmussen, he kind of gives more probabilistic sorts of arguments. And obviously that's what Draper's known for and Jeff Lauder has popularized. And so it seems to me that you could lean into both methods. I don't know. I'm not as familiar with the debate about the different maybe potential flaws with each one. I haven't read enough to actually just say, this is the best one or whatever, but it just seems that there's value to both different approaches, at least to me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's just something that I'm, trying to work through right now. Like I'm trying to learn more about the like critiques of Bayesian epistemology. But the thing is, like it seems like the primary applications of Bayesianism is in like medicine and scientific hypotheses. It's like, it seems, a lot of the stuff that I'm coming across, it doesn't really seem geared towards like metaphysical hypotheses. Some of it is, but anyway, so I'm just kind of, like I said, I'm trying to work through the critiques of that approach. The theoretical virtues approach, there's a lot to say, but like, it just seems obvious that there's something to both of these methodologies, like whatever the shortcomings are, that we haven't even like stumbled across yet. But, I mean, because the way that I approach this question is just like as an explanation, like atheism as an explanation of the world. And like, that seems to kind of like I think that was Quentin Smith's project, was like explanatory atheism. And that kind of seems to cover like both approaches in some broad sense. Like, well, a better explanation is the one that's more theoretically virtuous, and the better explanation is the one that like, it does a better job explaining all these various lines of evidence because it's like more predicted on that model. You don't need to introduce like a bunch of other hypotheses in order to explain the data. So yeah, you've got multiple lines of evidence that are like more expected on your model and like very few that are unexpected. And it's like more theoretically virtuous. So like all in all, it's like a better explanation. But that's like the very general way that I kind of approach atheism, which is just as an explanation of the world that I live in. Like theism and atheism, broadly construed, are just competing explanations for the world. And one of them, in my opinion, is just a lot better than the other one.
Yeah.
But, it just gets tricky because you can't just keep it at that level, of like atheism versus theism. Like you actually have to flesh out a worldview, which in a lot of ways is really fun. Like that's kind of what started at that, conference camp thing I was talking about earlier. In a way, I owe a huge debt to Frank Turek and all these other people because they actually got me started thinking about like, what is my worldview, and like trying to build up like a positive worldview. And it's like that task has, been meaningful and kept me busy for, like 7 years now. So, but yeah, it's like, actually, we are going to get into that a little bit later about like the specifics of your worldview, not just like, atheism versus theism, which is like a super general, like 40,000 foot view of the debate. Cause I mean, theism is just the proposition that God exists. And like, something like Christianity goes like so far beyond that. And the thing is, like, as atheists, if you actually just want to be like a human being with a worldview, you have to like go way beyond atheism. You have to build up something like positive as well.
Atheists never have the burden of proof.
Yeah, no, we're getting to that as well.
So what do you think? I know, so other than just, so we've talked about like comparing theories and all that kind of stuff. I know for sure too, at least in my case, I know that there's no knockdown argument or anything like that. But I do find like the premises in Schellenberg's hiddenness argument at least more plausible than not, personally. Though I can acknowledge that it can't trap every version of theism, because there's some wiggle room. You could just you put on your tinfoil hat and deny the existence of non-resistant non-belief, or you could just just say something like, well, like maybe temporary non-resistant non-belief can be like towards some greater good, but it's not. There's all kinds of things you could kind of wiggle out there. But ultimately, I think a good argument, even if it's sort of deductive, it's just, are the premises more plausible than not? And if you think they are, then you're justified in accepting that argument. So I think, at least for me, I know the hiddenness argument was one of the more, and again, coming from the Calvinist background, basically any kind of Calvinist would just say there is no non-resistant non-belief based on their interpretation of Romans 1. But then once I started kind of realizing, and I've made fun of this before, but literally someone like that, they try to say that most Christians try to make such a fuss of the value of testimonial evidence. And then you could line up every atheist who's ever lived in front of one of these people, and they would have to say like, oh, you're deceived in some sense. And literally like all that testimonial evidence that they're not resisting God, and then you believe that, a guy came back to life and floated into the sky based on decades after the fact written, accounts.
Right.
We don't have to get too far into like that, but I'm just saying it's just funny to me. The pretended emphasis on testimonial evidence in some circles, but then in reality, it's just, it's ultimately just bottom, I know that, and again, I guess we were going to talk about Calvinism a little bit more. I don't know if you want to go back to that at all, or you want to move on from that.
No, we can go back. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, with my evangelical upbringing, I started reading the Bible more seriously. I was always kind of a Christian, and I took it seriously in the context that I knew how. But when I was around, I think it was my graduation gift, my aunt and uncle gave me "Don't Waste Your Life" by John Piper. And so, he has a way of packaging, like happy joy, like pursue. I don't know if you've read anything, but like he has a way of packaging Calvinism where he just emphasizes like, God is most glorified when you're most satisfied in him, and blah, blah, blah. So like, I read that book, and it was basically just like sell your life out. Like it was a kind of one of those sell your life out for Jesus kind of books. And so I was not a Calvinist. I hated Calvinism, thought it was evil basically. But then I read that book, and I was like, as a young person who took, loved Jesus, I was kind of like, yeah, like this kind of like, I actually want to do something with my life and like make a difference and all that kind of stuff. And so I didn't become a Calvinist after reading that, but it definitely made me like, okay, John Piper, I might listen to some of what you say in other contexts, because you wrote this good book. And so anyway, I started taking Bible reading, and I was involved in like college and stuff, like different, like with the college groups and stuff like that. And I started reading the Bible roughly once a year since I was 18 or 19. And so that I haven't read, like there's people like the amateur exegete who like just reads biblical studies all day and reads Greek and stuff. I'm not anywhere close to that kind of knowledge, but I have read the Bible over and over many times. So like I have this kind of lay level, very high knowledge of the Bible just in that sense. But yeah, so I started taking my faith more seriously, and I don't know if any of your listeners or you understand like the new restless reform movement. It's like this evangelical. Anyway, there's this resurgence of Calvinism within like a lot of evangelical churches, like the Southern Baptist Convention. A lot more. It's just basically this kind of movement where people started taking Calvinism more seriously, even outside of Reformed circles. And so I guess I would have considered myself an evangelical Calvinist, even though I was like a Baptist and all this kind of stuff. But then eventually moved towards the more confessionally Reformed, like Presbyterian, like Westminster Confession of Faith. Like I don't know, there's all these. I don't know how far into the weeds we want to get with this, but yeah. So became a Calvinist, and it definitely was one of those things where transitioning from someone that hates the idea of Calvinism to basically like believing it. It's kind of you have to. It's kind of, one of the things that people often that aren't inside the community often wonder, like, how can someone believe that? Because ultimately they're saying God is going to ultimately. God chooses who to go to heaven and who to torture forever, basically. And it's completely based on his choice. And ultimately, like, yes, you're responsible for your sin, but, God mysteriously in this causal way ultimately causes you to sin in a way that he's not responsible. All these kind of metaphysical assumptions you have to bake into this.
No, I think Christianity is weird too. Oh, you're just talking about Calvinism.
Yeah, no, it is. I'm just saying, I'm just saying from the perspective of outsiders from Calvinism specifically, it's definitely one of those things where it's kind of like, how I think C.S. Lewis, he uses the lion for Aslan, like the character of the lion. And I think there's one where he talks about like there's this kind of a beauty in the untamedness of a lion or something like that. And so I think what a lot of Calvinists do is they kind of view God as this lion figure, like he's like so untamed. So they kind of revel in the fact that it's kind of like Islam. I don't know a bunch about Islam, but I'm just saying in general, like total submission is kind of like this untamed being that you have no like, you own nothing about that being. And so it's kind of like, I don't know if I should say it's kind of like spiritual BDSM. so it's kind of like you start to I don't know if I should say that, but it's kind of
go into more detail.
Yeah. No, but you just
really carry out the analogy.
No, but I think it's funny because it is like I thought about this today as I was thinking about this, and I told my wife, and she started laughing. But I'm not saying I'm not trying to give any. I'm just saying the idea is that you kind of you're in this total submissive position. God chooses whether you go to hell or not. You don't even know for sure. All you can know is that, are you believing now or not? And that might might show whether you're elect or not. And so it's kind of just this total like helplessness that you start to kind of love in a way. Not necessarily trick yourself into loving, but that might be a bad analogy. People might get mad at me for that, but
I think it's just a fantastic analogy.
But it's just kind of one of those things. Like, so I'm trying to explain from the inside how people kind of like revel in it, and it's kind of like this untamed God. Kind of like people question how people revel in Islam. It's like something, this thing that's so bigger than me just has so much control, and like you start to be like, yeah, So anyway, I just went on a rant about Calvinism. So
no, you're right. That Calvinism is evil. It's just, it happens to be a better explanation than other forms of Christianity of the world, I think. But no, you're definitely. I think you're definitely onto something there. But yeah, pushing off responsibility onto God, like, it is a relief for a lot of people, and I've seen it happen. Like, not even just in like a really broad kind of like intangible like kind of way, but like directly with specific tasks. Like when they think that the Holy Spirit is guiding them into doing something instead of it just being them, it's like the responsibility is pushed off, and it's like, oh, that was a relief, and then they suddenly have more confidence to speak or do whatever it is that they're doing, because it's like, well, it's not even me, it's this other guy who's in charge ultimately. And yeah, I mean, I've seen that in real time, and also it's a little bit exhausting to become an atheist in that way, because you didn't realize how much burden was being carried by God and by like your religious beliefs, where it's like suddenly the responsibility is on you. Like if you think that the world is unjust, no one is doing anything about it unless you do something about it. So it's like there isn't this like all wise, all good being who's like superintending over everything, who's going to make sure that the world is just in the end. Ultimately, it's like, no, the bad guys really could win, and then that would just be the end of it. Like that's a real possibility. And like I said, it's like this incredible increase in responsibility that it is kind of like tiring in a way.
Well, that's interesting. I don't want to. So, well, first, the Holy Spirit, told me to break up with my girlfriend. That's what they do. It's not me. It's the Holy Spirit. But it's funny though. It is like you do have to take more responsibility. I don't know if you saw this one, but I interviewed Derek Lambert from Myth Vision podcast, and his story is he was like a hardcore drug addict, like heroin, like hardcore drug addict, and actually deconverting from Christianity like helped him get clean and stay off of drugs. Because it's like, I got one life, like I have, it's not, you're not no longer, so I'm just, it's interesting that there's different ways of conceiving of this, where some people might look at a story and just be shocked and be like, that just, all my categories are shocked, because normally you hear people finding something bigger than themselves and they get over it. But, I think that there's probably more like him, where some of these beliefs are actually holding people back, holding some people back, when in reality, giving them up changed his life in different ways. I just thought that was interesting. Just a side comment.
So you mentioned the hiddenness argument a moment ago as like one of the stronger arguments for atheism, because you just don't see like, I mean, it's like these premises just like they seem kind of undeniably true, and then the conclusion follows. So are there? And I do totally sign on to that approach as well. Like I love that approach of just creating these, like premise one, premise two, conclusion arguments, and then just saying like both of these premises are way more plausible than not. So the conclusion is more plausible than not. Like, I think that's also like a really like fruitful way of approaching the discussion. But yeah, there are a couple arguments like that for me as well, where it's like, I can acknowledge that there's some conceivable Christian response to this, even if it's like a really weird Christian view. Like this ultimately isn't like a knockdown decisive proof, but it's like, sometimes you have to go to weird places to answer some of these arguments, and like you have to just keep adding and adding and adding, and like all these like hypotheses and auxiliary beliefs that like are in some cases are just like not popular in Christian circles. And it's like, well, if this is the truth, why isn't God kind of ensuring that this is what the people who follow him believe? Like he's supposedly like communicating revelation continually, according to many Christians, and yet only a tiny minority of Christians have apparently figured out, the truth. And anyway, so I think that there are arguments for atheism, like the teleological argument from evil, or like versions of the hiddenness argument, where it's just like, I just don't see how this could be wrong. You know, like I just like it really does seem, but I just have to like recognize like on an intellectual level that like no, there are Christians who are sincere Christians who have like, you know, their Christianity like stands up against this argument better than like 99% of Christians. But
Right.
anyway, so the hiddenness argument, that's a good. Are there any theistic arguments that you think are the most interesting or the most you know, have the most potential?
I guess I would say maybe the more complex contingency arguments, and I
Mhm.
don't know if that's because I haven't. Maybe it's because of it's the kind of form that I least understand compared to the others, and I just haven't dug into it enough. So that might be why I am more impressed with them, just because I do think they're a little more complex to kind of sort out all the metaphysics, you know, involved in all these moves that people are making. But I will say for sure, like when people try to go to the stage 2 kind of inferences, my eyebrows start to raise. So
Oh yeah.
you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I definitely have an issue there, even though I wouldn't be able to kind of pinpoint and go elaborate too far on it now. I guess off the cuff, I would say probably those, but I would say I'm actually finishing up The Existence of God by Swinburne now, probably within the next couple of days. So I guess it's kind of similar to the atheist approach, I guess, combining these different lines of evidence that seem more surprising or more probable on theism than something else, and kind of trying to make a cumulative case. I guess that would probably be the best shot for theism. Though I will say for sure that there are several places as I'm reading this Swinburne book that I rolled my eyes.
Oh yeah. Oh
I'm
my God.
still, I can be sympathetic to like the project that he's embarking on, even though. So this is funny. There's a passage I read that I highlighted, super annoyed. I highlighted it in anger, and it, lo and behold, on the theists posting their L's, it popped up a screenshot. I don't know if it was you or Chris, but it popped up and it was like Swinburne having a real one or something like that. I don't know if that was you or Chris, but it was the same passage that I was like, oh my God. Like I remember like I was reading on my phone and I kind of like put my phone down. It was like about animals. It was about animal suffering or something. I just read the passage and I was like, you know,
Yeah, he was trying to answer the problem of evil or just like offer some suggestions, and like just what he was saying. I think I literally have it saved on my phone. Like I don't have my phone next to me, but like I read it and I was just like, yeah, God's not real. Like if this is like I should actually in post I'll like put it up on the screen or something just for a moment so people can read what we're talking about. I don't have it in front of me, but
so it was you that took that screenshot then.
yeah. I mean, just like he was talking about like I can't even do it justice, man, because it's gonna sound like I'm lying or something if I try to characterize it. Yeah, no, I mean your your answer is the boring one, but it's the correct one, which is just that the cumulative case for theism is like, you know, that's their best shot, just like it is for atheism. Like there's no one argument I think that's gonna be like, you know, it's really gonna like, oh wow, I'm a theist. It does happen for some people, you know, but it wasn't like that for me as an atheist, where there was just like one argument that really persuaded me. It was, you know, and plus if you're forming a worldview, you want to consider all the evidence. You're not just going to want to consider like stray pieces of evidence that like support your worldview more than others. Like you want to consider the total evidence, like every line of evidence. So any cumulative case is kind of like, you know, it's unavoidable and you don't want to avoid it if you're trying to you know,
Well, that's
pursue truth. But
sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt. So one of the things that's interesting to me too is like realizing, and I mean, I should realize this before, but you know, everyone can explain everything if they want. Like you can pick. Like I remember Stephen Law gave an example of, you know, he's like, well, he gave the example of dogs are alien spies or something.
Yeah.
And he was like, it's like, you know, like imagine someone that believes that, like talking to someone trying to object, and it's like, well, you know, the dogs have transmitters in the brain. Well, but we open the brain, we can't see any transmitters. But they're part of the organic matter. And you just keep going and going. And so really, again, that's the complicated things with these worldview discussions, is that it's not as if we can't all explain this. We just have to start to ask who is rationalizing, who is. I mean, one of us is probably rationalizing certain amounts of data to fit our worldview. Do I think it's me or do I think it's my opponent? And I'm not saying you should accuse, you know, in a conversation, accuse people of rationalizing stuff, but I'm just saying,
right, you should accuse them of committing informal logical fallacies.
But anyway, so yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where you realize, and this is the thing too, as an atheist, I remember as a Christian, and I know people throw around the cognitive dissonance thing, but I do feel like, I feel so much more like, I feel like, not that I had anxiety, but it just, when people disagreed with me when I was a Christian, I mean, there's that baked in, like you want them to go to hell and all these other things. But that's, at least for me, and I think a lot of people that have walked away, there's a little bit of an insecurity to kind of defend what you believe. Now, as an atheist and like a Christian, that's all gone. Like people disagree with me. I'm like, okay, like I think what I think, and I have no I don't have this internal struggle to try to justify what I believe anymore. That's the same. I know, some people may or may not identify with that, but to me now, I feel way more free to just kind of follow the evidence wherever I think it actually goes than I did before, because I was kind of locked into this system, I guess.
Yeah. And that, that point about rationalizing, it's like, there are things that neither side is considered, and you need to explain, data that hasn't been brought to your attention before and that sort of thing. And people make objections that you hadn't considered. And, so it sometimes is like, it's okay to build on your worldview and stuff like that and flesh it out a bit more. But to the rationalizing point, it's so Randall Rouser made this point actually, which is I think a good way of illustrating that you start out with kind of a basic worldview, and then you become aware of evidence that's kind of maybe against it, and arguments against it, and more and more arguments for it, and you need to make adjustments to it. So sometimes people will say oh, well, this Bayesian approach is so subjective, because you say things like, well, it's more expected on this hypothesis or more surprising on that hypothesis. And people are like, isn't that totally subjective? And it's well, not really, because you can tell based on whether they have to add more explanation in order to account for the data. Do they have to build on top of the model? And, sometimes it's ad hoc, sometimes it's not. And, but the point is you have to add these auxiliary hypotheses in order to explain the data. People will start out with, theism, and then people make arguments from evil, and then they need to add all these other explanations. They need to build and build and build and build on this, originally fairly simple idea, to the point where it's just so at some point you're just going to say, okay, I am rationalizing. I'm adding too much stuff. And the way that Rouser illustrated this was if you have a car and you're driving along, and then all of a sudden something breaks, and it's a couple $100 to fix it. So that's a theoretical cost or some kind of evidence that's against it. Oh, sorry, just to finish the point I made a moment ago, if something is surprising on a hypothesis, you have to add more explanation. You have to build on the model. And if it's expected, then it just seems to be, in the best case, just entailed by your model.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's at least so expected that it just seems to fall out of the hypothesis. So on a hypothesis of indifference, you would expect kind of a mix of good and evil, because the universe is indifferent. Whereas on an evil God hypothesis, you would expect the world to be hell, because he just wants to design nature to maximize suffering and evil and so on. So it's you'd have to build on that explanation and add stuff to explain why there's so much good in the world. Well, anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But
yeah.
I actually
that's another thing you reminded me, that evil God challenge. I do think there's something to that. I mean, I know it's not you can't demonstrate, but I do think it's kind of this, if it's true that we can kind of, even if you want to, I know people try to, an evil God's impossible, blah, blah, blah. But even if we just say a God that takes pleasure in suffering or something like that, to stop using moral terms.
Yeah.
You could still prima facie just kind of look around and be like, no, I don't think that God exists. So I think you can flip it and say a God that delights in our ultimate well-being, which is what a lot of theists would want to say. Prima facie, you can just look around and be like, nope, don't think so. So I think, I think you can kind of, to me, I forgot about that one. But yeah, I do think that it's more of I don't know if it's really an experiential argument. It's kind of, the way I approach it is more prima facie, obviously, because you could counterbalance it, but just kind of the look around, you can kind of, if you can kind of rule it out with some ultimate being is trying to ultimately hurt everyone, you can kind of look around and say no, I don't think so. I think you can do it. You can flip it. I think that's perfectly plausible to flip it around.
Yeah. So. Especially when you just constrain it to the data of good and evil. Because a lot of people who have complaints about it, they have complaints about, the actual attributes of this evil God, and well, how could that be a necessary being? And they have all these objections along those lines. And I don't know if those work or not, but I just try to constrain it to the data of good and evil, where it's no, just as an explanation, it's basically as good of an explanation as a morally perfect, supremely benevolent God, because the facts are that we have this mixture of good and ill. And yeah, it just seems like the idea that there's a malevolent God who wants everyone to suffer and wants the world to be filled with evil. You could come up with like anti-theodicies that exactly mirror theodicies that could explain why there's good in the world. So it's just like in that realm of the problem of evil or the problem of good, it's like on exactly equal footing, it seems to me. But to get to the to find I keep distracting myself from Randall's car analogy, but so it's like you're driving this car and there's a cost, it's like a $200 repair, but it's cheaper than buying a new car. So you just get the repair. And then a little while later, there's another thing that breaks down, and then another thing and another thing and another thing. And at some point, you just get a new car.
Right.
Like at some point you're going to stop getting this thing repaired and you're just going to start over with a different vehicle. And like that's kind of the position that everyone is in, not just Christians. But it's like if I had like, there's no way I could have remained a Christian based on like my starting point, because like the type of Christian that I would be, like the type of Christianity that I think is most plausible right now is virtually nothing like the type of Christianity that I grew up with and that I like would subscribe to presently were I to become a Christian. So it's like it's just like at some point, this car is just you're having to replace stuff, you're adding stuff and changing stuff, and at some point you just say, okay, enough is enough. This isn't working out. Like I need something else. And that point is subjective. It's like different for everybody.
Right.
But at some point, you're just going to make the calculation that like I have had to make so many adjustments to this worldview just to accommodate basic data that I just need to start over. And like I said, I don't think there's really an objective way to decide like when you should do that or not. It is ultimately like, like up to you personally. But anyway, I like that analogy, like starting with something basic and then you need to keep altering it and adding to it and changing stuff. And eventually you're just going to get a new car. So we might as well talk about it. Everyone's favorite subject, the issue that never fucking goes away, the definition of atheism. I mean, why not? Everyone's talking about it. Always, eternal recurrence is real, and it has to do with this issue. So we should just start off by saying that, of course, anyone can stipulate any definition of any term that they want. But that said, where do you come down on the whole like Lacktheist issue?
Yeah, I definitely side with Oppie and others, where I think the best way to frame these conversations is that atheism is the belief that God doesn't exist, or something like that, roughly something like that. And that being said, I had Oppie on and I asked him this question too, because I was and it was actually kind of surprised that Rationality Rules used my clip at the end of his recent video. I didn't know he was going to do that. But yeah, so I basically asked him kind of a question like that, and he basically said, he's like, yeah, I don't really care. People use it differently. I sort of take that kind of, I think that the Oppie's definition is correct, but I sort of take his attitude to where I sort of recognize the lack of belief definition is valid, in the sense that, so like, for example, the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy has a lack definition in there as an option. It's not as widely circulated across like philosophical stuff. So it's not like predominant, but if it's starting to sneak into stuff like that, then I think it's important to just say, okay, it's valid. I will admit it's valid, though ultimately not helpful. That's my opinion. So with that being said, I don't normally pick fights about it, but I have some caveats though, some huge caveats. So as you know, and people that enter into these conversations, the lack definition does have a tendency to be connected to certain attitudes towards like burden of proof and things like this. And so if it just on the surface, if someone is defining it a certain way, I usually don't care. But if I see like a certain attitude is accompanying that, then I might be more inclined to step in and be like, don't try to, I mean, again, burden of proof, I want to say too, it can be context dependent. So if you're walking down the street and some street preacher comes up to you and says, repent and believe the Lord Jesus Christ or something, you might say, in that situation, you might not accept any burden of proof at all. It's like, okay, tell me why I should accept the Lord Jesus Christ and whatever. You need to give me the case. So I understand that, not everyone has like the burden of proof in every situation. So preface that. But in these kind of more complicated worldview discussions where you're comparing what makes the best sense of reality, then it is the case that you do have an atheist does have some sort of burden to say if you're coming on equal terms to these discussions, to say why they have why do they not believe in God? What reasons do they have? So that's my little spiel. I guess I generally try not to let things get in the way of productive conversations if possible. So I think sometimes quibbling about definitions can be counterproductive, but at the same time, again, that's with my caveats that I just kind of laid out there. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I completely agree. It's just, yeah, like, of course as long as we're clear about how we're using the terms, then it's fine. But in my view, there are reasons to prefer the, the philosophical definition, like like, I think Rationality Rules called it the metaphysical definition, or whatever. It's like, there are reasons for preferring that. And like, this isn't just a conversation about the definition of a word. Like you point out, like, it's connected to other things, like the burden of proof, and also to whether you can actually give reasons for your view. Like a lot of people adhere to the Lacktheist definition because sometimes it's initially counterintuitive. Like, how could you give reasons in favor of a negative proposition? Like, God doesn't exist. How would you like argue for that by giving evidence? So it's like, initially, I think that a lot of people feel that way. And like, if you say that it's not just a lack of belief and they don't just have to reject theistic arguments and then like affirm the null hypothesis or something, they wouldn't know what to do. Like, they wouldn't know how to make a case for atheism, like, other than that. But like, it's been laid out extensively over the centuries, actually. But especially in the last few like decades, like, there are many ways to make a case for atheism that doesn't just rely on like attacking theistic arguments and then just saying like, well, that's all I have to do.
Well, that's one of the things. Sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt, but that reminds me of the whole, like, I think like Oppie's approach would be, some Lacktheists, the way they look at it might just be something like that. Like, you don't need God to explain anything. That's a reason that you don't believe in God. Yeah. I mean, you could say like, that kind of whole best argument against God thing where you compare, he's comparing naturalism and theism and stuff, but I'm just saying this whole idea of how can you give reasons? Well, you might just say, I can account for all this data without appealing to your deity, like, period. Like, you could give other reasons other than that, but you don't have to, it's not, I don't know. I feel like some of them look at it in a way that is not completely helpful. There's philosophically rigorous arguments to the extent of like, we'll compare these two ways of looking at the world. I don't need your stuff to explain it. And I think at best, that's sometimes what they're trying to say. Like, I lack reasons to believe, blah, blah, blah. I think the most charitable interpretation I could possibly give that is to say something like, I don't need what you're saying to explain anything. Like, so that's
then they should learn how to formulate that into an argument instead of just saying like, I don't need arguments, which is what I usually hear from them.
No, I totally agree. I wonder if some of it has to do with just, I don't know if it's just not being informed or just, they just don't care. And there's all kinds of explanations for why that might be, but yeah.
No, it's like, it's also just like, if you could argue that God doesn't exist, not just that, you lack a belief, like, if you could just hypothetically make a case for that position, God does not exist, wouldn't you rather? Like, isn't that a more desirable position? It's a stronger position. And, it's stronger, like, philosophically. Like, it would be better if we could justify the claim that God doesn't exist. Obviously, not with absolute certainty. The fact that even has to be said is so annoying. But, like, if we could justify that claim that God doesn't exist, that would be better than just the Lacktheist claim. So it's like, even like, it's a better position. It's more desirable. It's also like psychologically more compelling when, our friend August mentioned this to me, where he's like, you can imagine two conversations where you say, why are you an atheist? And you say, well, it's a lack of belief and I'm not convinced. And then it's just like 30 minutes of like, just like tedious squabbling about like who has the burden of proof and like, whether or not the theist is committing logical fallacies or something. Or you can say, why are you an atheist? And then you can give reasons. You can say like, well, atheism is a better explanation of nature than theism. Right. You can say that like, naturalism is more theoretically virtuous as a model, as an explanation than theistic hypotheses. You can say that there are many lines of evidence that are surprising on theism and very few lines of evidence that are surprising on naturalism. And you can say that theism has these internal tensions and, potentially these problems with coherence. Mm-hmm. And you can say that, well, if you want to know why I reject Christianity, then, we can talk about like the work of Bart Ehrman or something. Like, that actually seems like a way more fertile ground for like a productive dialogue and for like pursuing truth, by just saying, okay, I'm an atheist, here are the reasons why I'm an atheist, as opposed to this like thing that always strikes me as just kind of slippery as like, oh, I don't have to give reasons, I don't have the burden of proof. Like, it's just more intellectually defensible, it's more philosophically desirable. It's just like, it's a better position. Like, so even if you are a Lacktheist, wouldn't you rather be an atheist? Like, wouldn't you rather be like, or whatever, like a positive atheist or whatever you want to call it? Like, it's a stronger position. It's kind of like, as a very rough analogy, you could think of like a fideist, who thinks that like, well, I just think that you have to make the leap of faith to believe in God. Like, that's what you have to do. And it's like, okay, well, if natural theology, like trying to prove God through like evidence, if natural theology worked, wouldn't that be better? Like, as a theist, like if it wasn't just a leap of faith and like you could give strong reasons and like good evidence to support your belief in theism, wouldn't that be more desirable than just making a leap of faith? Like, it would be nice if natural theology worked, right? Like, if I was talking to a fideist, I would at least want to know, like, wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't you prefer, if that were the case, that natural theology actually worked? Anyway, that's kind of how I see the distinction between the two camps here, where it's like, wouldn't you rather I was right? Like, wouldn't you rather this like stronger position that God doesn't exist?
Yeah.
Because you can justify that. You actually can.
Yeah, I don't think that ever came up, at least when my agnostic to atheism. I just didn't really care. Like, new atheist stuff had nothing to do with my deconversion from Christianity or even my move to atheism. It did nothing. I mean, I read some of it. Like, I read like some Sam Harris. I read, what else did I read? I didn't read too much. I really didn't read a ton of the new atheist stuff, honestly. But I mean, yeah. Do you mind if I talk a little bit about deconversion from Christianity specifically too, before I don't want to forget about that?
Yeah, sure. No, I just want to mention though, I did read the New Atheist and I did like them, and they had something to do with my conversion. I eventually anyway. I eternally owe them a debt of gratitude for getting me to question religion and introducing me to philosophy and stuff. But yeah.
Well, that's actually, I guess while we're on that, I was going to say too that I think this reminded me too of our last conversation, not the debate, but where we were talking about new atheists and how like Christians are so obsessed with new atheists and all that kind of stuff. I just think it's, I don't know, I think it's funny. That's why I was jokingly using the new atheist kind of thing, because I think some of it is like they want to correct their bad misconceptions, but I think some of it honestly is that they're sort of kind of their attitude, and they went overboard some, but like the spiciness that they started engaging some of these fundamentalist religions, they don't like that. A lot of theists don't like that. And so like I said at the beginning with my YouTube channel, I'm not as obnoxious as the new atheist, but I do involve snark sometimes, and especially when I'm criticizing beliefs that I think are particularly harmful or dumb. And so that's why I kind of jokingly, I don't know if I might put it on my Twitter just as a joke, but it is like, I do, I think some of it is, I don't want to speculate too much, but like an insecurity about their attitude towards theism. I think a lot of popular in America, they weren't used to being talked to like that. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's a recent thing. Yeah.
Like someone actually saying, you know what, like, fuck this. Like, just, so I don't think anyone was kind of ready for that. And so I think some of the reaction to the new atheists, they might say it is just because, oh, they made all these dumb mistakes. I think some of it is kind of like a reaction to like, you don't need to get to talk to us that way. You know what I mean? So I think, I don't think we should, I know there's some people whose project is to be nice and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. That's not quite my project, especially with fundamentalism. So yeah, but anyway,
when it comes to like fundamentalism and the harmful aspects of religion, it's like having someone like Christopher Hitchens get up there and just sneer at it. Like, it not only is it like justified, it's like, it's a good thing. It is a good thing that people get up there and sneer at harmful beliefs, and it's like, whatever else you can say about them, like, they were good at making fun of religion. And like, yeah, the people in my life who were like aware of the new atheists, they just hated them because they made fun of their beliefs. Like, they weren't like, it's not like the people in my life were like, philosophy majors who were just like, oh, they know nothing of epistemology. It's like, no, they weren't doing that. They were just mad that they were being made fun of. Like, that was it. And like you said, they weren't used to it. It's like they had this kind of place of societal privilege. And, you can tell because every time they're not shown like utmost deference and respect, they act like they're being oppressed and they're just moments away from being shipped off to like an internment camp or something.
There's
like
that...
literally someone said to me during that time that like Christians will soon be rounded up and sent to internment camps. And I'm like, who is going to be doing that? Like 70% of the country.
The atheists are being mean. Yeah, that reminds me, there was a meme I shared a long time ago. There's like this picture of the guy. He's like on the fetal position, and he's like got his head under the water, and he's got like his face like peeking out of the water. He's like, it's like, and the tagline was kind of like, you know, Christian oppression, like in the West or something like that. Like he's in shallow water, and he's like in the fetal position. His face is like sticking up. But, I thought that was a funny image, basically, for exactly what you just said there.
Yeah, and just for the record, no new atheist has ever said anything as unhinged as Christians are about to be sent to internment camps, because like based on the fact that someone is being like, yeah, I don't think this is true and it's also harmful and stupid. Like that was a real thing that someone said to me that they sincerely believed. And it's just like, I'm sorry, I've never heard Richard Dawkins say something that compares to that. Anyway,
I don't get it. Yeah, just briefly though, as I do want to say that Christianity, because atheism didn't have a ton to do with it, I do want to say a little bit about that. And it's definitely hard to boil down exactly what leads to deconversion, but I'll try. I would say for Christianity specifically, and I've said this in other places, that I sort of had a built-in, I don't think I would have acknowledged it as such, but like a Humean skepticism towards miracle claims. I did kind of dabble within kind of a little bit charismatic stuff for a small part of my Christian journey, but at the end, again, I was a confessional Calvinist. I thought a lot of the charismatic stuff was not correct, and there was a lot just kind of hysteria. So anyway, I had this kind of Humean skepticism towards miracle claims, and because of that, there was, again, this is kind of ties back around, there was multiple lines of evidence that were holding up my resurrection belief. So, or like you could look at them as like pillars or something like that. So like thinking that the Bible was divinely inspired, that my religious experience was trustworthy, generally speaking, that there was prophecy of Jesus in the Old Testament, or that the testimonial evidence we had for Jesus and the resurrection was better than I think it is now. And so once those pillars started sort of cracking, and I still sort of had the Humean skepticism intact, I just found myself like not believing it anymore. I know personal experience was big, because within like the Reformed tradition, like there's the different confessions that kind of guide the more confessional Reformed theology. And one of the things it says is like, you know, the way you ultimately, like it says like, well, the way we know scriptures, the word of God is because it fits together in all these ways, blah, blah, blah. But at the end, it just says the ultimate way, you know, is because the Holy Spirit testifies, you know, in your heart that this is the word of God. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I did place a heavy emphasis on not religious experience in the sense of like this charismatic gathering and like got to sing the songs and the key change makes the Holy Spirit appear. None of that. Mm-hmm. It was more just kind of like this internal sense that like when I read the Bible, like God is somehow like I sense that God is speaking to me. Even if it's kind of like in a low level way, it's not necessarily like, oh my gosh, God is talking to me, like not like that. But so that was big for me. But when I started, all those different things started kind of being eroded, I just didn't find myself believing like, wow, the resurrection, it just didn't seem plausible to me unless it was held up by all these other things. And I will say too, that the process, I'm sure others can identify, the process of leaving the church and stuff is definitely personally frustrating, because you can start to see how shallow some of the church relationships are that you might have thought were stronger than they were.
Yeah.
And then you start to walk away and realize, oh, I thought that we had a, you know, closer relationship than we did, but then you see how people react to different things and you're like, oh, that's kind of disappointing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, I was recently at a wedding with some like family and like church members who I haven't seen in a long time. And it was just interesting, like the people who gave me the cold shoulder and the people who were like excited to see me, like, mm-hmm. you know, like it was just, they just kind of were sifted through, like the people who I actually was right. Like, no, I did have like a friendship with them or whatever. And other people where it's like, as soon as I left the tribe, they're just like, fuck you, you're dead to me.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like shocking a couple times, because, you know, I don't really feel that way towards Christians. I'm not just like, you're dead to me. It's like, no, it's just, it's a one-way street of like, you know, and a lot of atheists like deal with this kind of from their families. You know, it's like as soon as you become an atheist or non-religious, like they kind of like cut you off a little bit. And I get, you know, lots and lots of emails actually from people who are going through this. It's very difficult, you know, like your family cuts you off. And I was lucky enough not to deal with that really. Like my parents made a decision that they would rather like have a relationship with me than take some kind of like principled stand or something, mm-hmm. like in this area. but not everyone is that lucky, and they end up kind of estranged from their families, and their families like say that it's their fault. They're like, you're doing this, why, stop it, stop doing this to yourself. And it's like, it's just so abusive, you know. It is literally like a form of abuse that's sanctioned by many different sects of Christianity, and I'm sure it goes way beyond Christianity, but it's just like, yeah, this kind of like estrangement that happens that's just totally one-sided, and even while they're doing it, they're saying that it's your fault, you know.
Yeah, I know. I was definitely pretty angry about some of it. I know, looking back, I think, again, not all of it, like some of the more, abusive stuff, I think is just contemptuous. But I do think some people was kind of fear. I don't know, maybe I'm different, and because I was actually like, I'd help with like the youth group. I was like teaching Sunday schools and stuff like that. So in a way, I was looked up to kind of as an authority. And so I think some people might have just been afraid, even more like people that were older than me, like in the 40s and 50s or something, that were smart. Like it's kind of like, I know. So my pastor, so the church that we were going to, when I left, I kind of had a phase where I basically was really angry. Went through an anger phase and kind of left and stopped going. My wife was going to church still. And I kind of just withdrew. I don't know if I would consider myself quite an agnostic then, but and then I kind of reverted. This is sometimes common, where you like walk away and then you kind of revert back for a little bit and then it dies. But anyway, when I initially kind of met with him and was like, yeah, I don't know if I believe this stuff anymore. And it was just the way that he handled it. I'll never forget it though, because he was kind of just like, I don't really know what to say to you. You're like, because you're going to know everything I'm going to say. You know what I mean? Like I like we had talked like theology and like different, they were more into like some versions of like presuppositionalism and stuff like that. So like I already know all the tricks. Like you're not going to get me. You know what I mean? So like I was he didn't quite know how to handle it, other than just be like, well, did you never truly love Jesus or something? I was like, oh my god. But like so other than that, and so even that was the pastor, and so I'm just empathizing looking back, even though I was really angry. If he was kind of like caught off guard and was like, I don't know what to tell you, I'm just imagining the people that don't know as much as that might be like kind of afraid, you know what I mean, to engage. So I'm just trying to be nice, because I know initially I was kind of very frustrated with how the community handled certain things. But
oh yeah,
looking back, I guess I can be nice and say, maybe they're just afraid or something. They don't want to burn in hell.
Yeah, especially if God can, like, if he's monitoring your thoughts at all times and like punishes you for doubt or something, or if they think that, like, because I'm trying to get back into my own head, and it's almost like God would take it personally or something if you like openly questioned, or like entertained those doubts. He would hold it against you or something. Because like if you think you have a personal relationship with God and like you can talk to him in your head, it's like, there's no privacy there to entertain any doubts. Like he can see everything that you're thinking and feeling and stuff. So it's like I can see how some people are just like, don't even go there.
Well, it's kind of like, I mean, our church kind of played, I would say there's some pockets that they pay lip service to doubt, in the sense where it's like, oh, God can handle your doubts, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately it's like, kind of like, you can doubt, but just don't doubt too much. You know what I mean? So it's like kind of like, it's really the same as like a normal kind of fundamentalist approach. It's just like, they're just now paying lip service to doubt. And one of the other things, I don't want to rant too much about it, but it was kind of funny because I'd been at the time, like Peter Enns, I don't know if you've read anything by Peter Enns, a biblical scholar. He was at Westminster Seminary, which is a conservative, like flagship seminary for the Presbyterian Reformed people. But some of his views started to change, and he started kind of looking at the Bible differently and having more looser versions of inspiration. And so Calvinists hate Peter Enns, so because he was in the flagship seminary and he changed his mind. And anyway, so I've been reading some of that, and like so at the time when I was really struggling, I was like thinking more about Old Testament issues, in the sense of like, did the Exodus happen as it's depicted, the conquest narratives, like all these different things. And I did have contact with that pastor, and he was like, okay, we can like read a book together or something. I was like, okay, cool. And he's like, well, here are the books we can read, like Richard Bauckham, like all these different like resurrection. I was like, well, I don't have questions about that right now. I want to talk about like Old Testament stuff. So it's like, even then it's just like trying to control, you gotta, it's like, no, don't read the stuff that you're actually questioning. Let me just get you back to Jesus with the, Richard Bauckham stuff. And don't worry about that, all your Old Testament questions. It's just a lot of that. I have a lot of frustration with how that all went down, but I can stop ranting about that now.
Yeah, no, I had a similar thing where it's like, people want your problems and your doubts to be one thing. And like a lot of the times they don't even want to like hear you out, or they just kind of assume they already know, which is like kind of baffling. But like, And we're going to come to this in a minute because I know that you liked that book, The Reason for God, back when you were a Christian. But like something I heard so commonly was just like, okay, well, the thing that you don't understand, Emerson, is that there's truth. Okay, there's real truth. And like there's objective truth. It's not all relative. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, why are you assuming that I'm a relativist about truth? Like, yeah, it was so annoying when people would just like assume they know what you think about things and never ask you and then just like preach at you about how, the truth is true, whether you believe it or not or something. It's like, this is just, it's just so frustrating and it's just totally unproductive. And yeah, they're not, a lot of them are just not prepared to handle this sort of thing. It's like, that's why there's this like designated little, group of Christians called apologists who like are supposed to handle it, because it's not really, even though they pay lip service to it, like you said, like serious doubt, it's just not really a part of like everyday Christian life for the people who were like in the pews, where it's just like, well, I gotta like seriously figure out, I gotta read Graham Oppy, I gotta like, or even like the God Delusion. I've caught numerous Christians lying about reading the God Delusion. But I just wanted to, before I forget, return to Lacktheism for 1 second. One of my main issues with it, and like this is not really like a philosophical issue, I just don't like when children are brought into these kinds of things. Because if you're a Lacktheist, that means that like, yes, like the cactus is an atheist, the fetus is an atheist, but like also like, and like that seems like a reason to not accept the view to me, but like also like young children are atheists, and I don't like that kind of thing. I don't like when like children are included in these things. So when your position entails that 6-year-olds are atheists, I just get a bit tense. I don't like Catholic 5-year-olds. I don't think that should be a thing that anyone considers to be a serious idea. And I don't like the idea of atheist 5-year-olds. It's just, like I said, just leave the kids out of it, please. Like that's just one little reason. Like I said, I get a bit tense when people, because sometimes, oh, babies are atheist, rocks are atheist, whatever. It's like, yeah, but also like 7-year-olds, and I don't like bringing them into this.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, so one last thing before we head out. Before we go, I'm just going to brazenly steal the lightning round from Aaron Rabinowitz at Embrace the Void. So I'm going to list things, and you're going to have to decide whether they're real or not real.
No.
You're going to have to answer real or not real. So I'm going to name something, you have to answer one way or the other. So as we all know, without God, there is no truth. All atheists think that truth is relative, as Timothy Keller explains in his wonderful book. So anyway, even though some of these things are bound to change, we're going to go through this rapid fire session of real or not real. And then maybe if we have time, just really quickly before we get going, do you have anything you want to say about that god-awful book? Like, why did you like that?
I think it had to do, well, I mean, I was convinced at the time that I think for me, for some reason, the idea that like you need God to ground like objective morality, that was a big thing for me. And so like that kind of kept me within certain confines for longer than I should have been, just because I was convinced by that. And so I thought that he did a good job. I mean, now I look back at it and think it's just kind of like he paints everything very narratively, and he ends everything with Jesus. And so it's very evangelistic. And so at the time I was kind of like, it seemed like a good book to like, I used it to take people through that weren't really interested in these topics. So we'd read a chapter and have a beer with them or something and like discuss what was taught. So it seemed for me, it was useful in that kind of context where, yes, it wasn't super like rigorous, but it was easy to read for someone that, is not into that stuff. But at the same time, it seemed to me better than like Frank Turek. You know what I mean? Like he clearly knows more than like Frank Turek, and he's not like butchering too much stuff. And to preach the gospel at the end of every chapter, basically. It was like, well, after talking about like truth, it's like, well, Jesus is the ultimate truth. And, like that would be a way for me to kind of talk about Jesus and tie Jesus to the thing that we're, so it was an evangelistic tool for me. So that's part of the reason.
Well, I mean, because I flipped through that book when I was like going through my deconversion process, and I was just like, all atheists are relativists. That seems to be like the main assumption here. Like, I don't know why. It just seems like he kept attacking relativism, and he's still doing it today. I just saw him on Twitter the other day where he was just like attacking like atheist relativists, and I replied and was just like, "Who are you talking about? Like, name names."
I think that has to do with, it might be, I don't know when that book was published, but he was
2008.
he was a pastor in New York for many years, and like he would host like, you know, after the sermons, like he would host like engagement with the audience and stuff. And so I don't know if some of that had to do with like a very specific like kind of time frame that he was just talking to people, and like, but now no one talks like that. So I think it's like outdated. So I don't even, at best, I think probably there's like this, you know, true for me, not true for you, like kind of mentality that maybe he was experiencing when he was in New York and talking to these people on the ground, and just like extrapolating from that that's like what everyone thinks or something. Like, yeah. I don't know if that's what it is, but yeah. So basically, like, I don't remember, the first half was just like common objections to Christianity, and it was like, you know, anyway, yeah, it's definitely, there's definitely some chapters in there that I'm just like, yes, obviously the people I'm talking to are going to agree with this. You know what I mean? I think the first chapter might have been about relativism. I don't remember. It's been a while.
Well, who knows what kind of depravities are happening in New York, but all I'm saying is that like that was even at the time of like new atheists and stuff, and they weren't saying that.
Yeah.
That was 2008. Anyway, so okay, so lightning round.
Okay.
You're in the hot seat. So first one, easy one, real or not real, God.
Not real.
Really? No, okay. I'd be really surprised if you answered the other way. Okay, free will.
See, I have undeveloped thoughts on this, so I guess I'll tentatively say, what do you mean by free will? Okay.
Not elaborating. You just have to say real or not.
Shit. Fuck. I guess tentatively, so you gotta define, is it compatibilist free? Okay, I'll say real, because maybe you can interpret compatibilist free will. Real.
Okay, so you're kind of in the compatibilist camp at the moment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Tentatively.
Objective morality.
Tentative real.
Cool. An afterlife.
Not real.
Well, you never know. You got to ask. Society.
Society.
Yeah,
real?
Is society real?
Yeah.
I don't think it's real.
Yeah.
Okay. Some people say not.
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm missing something like that about the definition of society, but I mean, I guess real.
Margaret Thatcher said it wasn't real.
Huh.
Some people think it's not real. But anyway, okay. The fine-tuning problem.
If by that you mean like there is a problem with the fine-tuned article. So you're catching me here, because I haven't. There's so many. Let me just preface this. There's a lot of stuff in philosophy of religion I still need to think about, but I will go ahead with the lightning round. I'll say tentative real. Tentative.
Cool. Teleology and nature.
I've heard you talk about this in a way that atheists could think about it. I would say tentative real then, because I think that was a really interesting approach that you, because I had actually never heard that framed that way before, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. You could still speak of teleology and nature even if you don't think it's ultimately designed. So yeah, I'll say tentative real. Oh
yeah, you're talking about like teleonomic design
or something. Like you were saying, I forget it. You were saying somewhere, I don't know if it was in the debate I hosted, you were talking about how there's a coherent way for atheists to speak of teleology and nature. And I was like, I think that's actually, I hadn't heard a lot about that, but it just seemed intuitive to me. So again, tentative real, if I'm thinking of it that way.
Well, just to nitpick, there's Ozymandias Ramses II made two videos, I think, about teleonomy versus teleology.
Okay, so maybe
they're both about like purpose and design. So like you can have like purpose in nature and design in nature without any teleology. So that would be like teleonomic design, like purpose and design that's produced by natural selection or something. So you could still coherently, like an evolutionary biologist like Richard Dawkins could still, if he wanted to, talk about design and purpose and like the function of this or that without ever thinking that there's teleology.
Okay, but, so maybe I guess tentative, not real. I say not real then.
Yeah,
what you just said there, the way he's spelling it out, like you can coherently speak of design and nature without. That's what I mean. That seems attractive to me.
Okay, cool. Yeah. No, I just wanted to clarify if you were referencing that, because teleology, if you wanted to be an atheist and believe in teleology, you'd have to go. The only route I've seen is like the Thomas Nagel route in Mind and Cosmos, where he talks about like natural teleology, and that's like way more controversial than teleonomy. But okay, so next, real or not real? Numbers.
I guess tentative real. Again, I have so much more to think about. I don't know. This is not. Hopefully, this probably isn't very satisfying.
No, it's. I mean, like this is excruciating for people, because if you can, it's like it's tough to actually like pick a side sometimes, and especially. I mean, I'm glad we're getting you on the record, so that way when you change your mind on all this, you can apologize for thinking that numbers are real. But okay, so social constructions, real or not real?
Like that some things are social constructs. I
Yeah,
mean,
do you consider social constructs, like, do those count as real things?
yeah, why not?
Cool. Well, you know, some people say like, well, that's just a social construction, as if that means it's like not real or something.
Yeah, I think it's real.
Okay. Human nature.
See, I don't know what you mean, but I'd have to ask clarification. I mean, like, are we biologically disposed towards certain things? I mean, is that what you mean?
Just, I mean, however you take it. Like, do you, are you like, do you think human nature is like a real thing?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Tender.
Beauty.
I mean, I think you could say, so there's a question of like, I'll just say first, I'll answer the question, tentative real. But also it depends what you mean. Like, so, I think I haven't read, what's that cosmologist book? Like the one that debated William and Craig that beat him.
Oh, the big picture.
Yeah, I haven't read that yet, but I think I've heard basically distilled where like you could talk about things in certain ways and still say it's real. You know, even if it's not. So I would say, I guess, even if beauty is not an objective thing, I think you can still say it's real if you talk about it in those kind of. So I'd say yes, real.
Cool. Okay. The historical Jesus.
That a person existed, yes, real.
Okay. Okay, so you're not a mythicist.
No.
Good.
I'm not.
Okay. Chairs.
I mean, yeah. I again, there's probably some context I'm missing here because I don't read enough philosophy. But yeah,
I was about to say, see, you clearly haven't read enough philosophy if you think this is a straightforward question about whether chairs exist.
Yeah, I don't.
Very heated debate that will probably never end about whether chairs exist.
I mean, in a common sense way, sure, but I'm missing a lot of context here just because, like I said, I got a lot more reading to do.
No, dude, I've looped back around to common sense philosophy. Chairs are real. Okay. Last one, phenomenal consciousness.
Can you define how you're using that term?
Just the fact that it's like something to be you right now.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I guess, yeah.
Right. Be completely crazy to deny that, right?
Yeah.
It would be completely crazy to deny something like that, right? He said directly into the camera.
Yeah, there's something that it's like to be me. That's the other thing. I think the next thing I want to think about, and like I said, this is the speed round. And I said at the beginning, I'm my main interest. I'm mainly focused on sort of like philosophy, religion stuff, but there's all kinds of other stuff I have barely read anything about. So like consciousness is another one where, panpsychism seems interesting to me, and I know that's your main thing, but like I have not read, and I know I need to like read it, or maybe have Philip Goff come on my channel and just talk to me. But there's lots of areas I'm kind of stuck within the philosophy of religion because I'm trying to get up to a certain point before I start branching out, if that makes any sense. Like I want to be conversant up to a point and then kind of start exploring what I think about all these other kinds of topics like consciousness and all that other stuff. So
yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, I was just kind of a default like reductive materialist for most of my, adult life, I guess. I thought I hated philosophy of mind, but then I realized I was just like reading the wrong people who were asking questions that were boring, and like just the physicalist paradigm just kind of yields like questions and puzzles and stuff that are just not interesting to me and just don't seem like the right questions. And then it wasn't until I started seeing some like non-physicalist stuff outside the context of religion, some like non-physicalist stuff where I was like, oh yeah, no, this is interesting. This is like way more, because like Sam Harris was my introduction to like philosophy of mind. Like when I was like, a like teenage deconvert, I guess. Like that's who I heard about all this stuff for the first time from. And he's like a fan of like Thomas Nagel and David Chalmers, and like they're both non-physicalist atheists. So it's like the person who, and Sam Harris is like basically a non-physicalist. His wife definitely is, Annika Harris. But so it's like, I don't know, just the way that these issues were even framed to me in the beginning, like yeah, and then you go over to the physicalist paradigm, it's like, what are they even talking about? This is so boring. And then anyway, it wasn't until I started looking into like non-physicalists when I started even to have an interest in philosophy of mind. But yeah, no, philosophy of religion is cool because it's like it touches on like every issue in philosophy. It feels like sometimes like epistemology, philosophy of mind, like philosophy of cosmology, just like all these different metaphysical areas. I'm kind of blanking on different areas of philosophy right now, but like it does kind of like touch on everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all that I had. Is there anything that you want to touch on before we sign off?
I can't really think of anything. I think we touched on a lot of topics. So, but thanks again for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, no, anytime. And, you know, for people listening to this, I went on your channel a few months back, and it inspired me to buy this USB microphone for these types of events because the audio quality was legendarily awful. I didn't realize that when so I'm just wearing headphones like an idiot, and the microphone isn't even like active there. But anyway, yeah, so yeah, thanks for coming on. You're welcome anytime. And yeah, really good to talk to you, man. Thanks for coming.
All right. Thank you.